Go back and save it as equivalent to the...
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming today. We're going to talk about a very exciting topic. It's near and dear to my heart, specifications. No, I don't say, at first, a little background. I didn't have a lot of experience in specifications for quite a while. And over the last 9 months or so, I've realized how important they are. They are extremely, it's part of the whole, it's three things, the P, S, and E. And we really ignore the S and E part very often. We just look around the floor and everyone's focused on MicroStation all day long. So this is a very, very important topic. And I know it's a little dry. It's probably not built into our, hardwired in our brains. Most of us are civil engineers and don't like attorney text and legalese and all that sort of stuff. And that's really what these documents are, but they're very important. The goal for today is to provide everyone an overview of specifications, why they're important, and how to write them. By a show of hands, who's written some specifications before? Okay, so a little more than half. That's good. And so hopefully for the people that have written them before, this will serve as a refresher. And for the people that haven't had too much experience with them, this will be a good little introduction for everyone. You might be asking yourself, why did you get invited to this? If you look around, most of the audience here is associate level and above. And the reason being is the expectation is the associate civil engineers will be writing the specifications and the civil engineers will be reviewing the specifications. So that's how we selected the audience. How does all this fit together? The specifications are what ensures that we end up with a quality product that's installed correctly and that the contractor gets paid. So these are, I would say, is of equal importance to your plans. Without specifications, we're going to end up with a poor product and it's not going to be installed the right way. So we got the topics for today are Sherrie's going to go over just an overview of specifications in Section G. Margie's going to talk about Section D. Sherrie's going to come back and do Section R. And Dave is going to be our closer and talk about Section LS. We got a lot to cover today, so I encourage everyone to hold your questions to the end. Just write them down. We'll stay up here as long as necessary to answer all the questions, but we've got quite a bit to cover today, so just keep that in mind. And turn it over to Sherrie.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay. Thank you for coming. I'd like to begin with a story. So one day, my 3-year-old son and I were at Costco, and we were going down the aisle where they sell light bulbs, lighting fixtures, and other electrical items. And then suddenly, I see my son point to a package of light bulbs. And he said, "Look, Mommy, ideas." Okay. Anyway, screen. Okay, you got that. That's him. And then I thought, I wish it was that easy to get ideas. Like an idea on how to write specifications, how to use those special provision templates that we need for our projects. It would be so easy. I would just grab like 50 packages and set them up in our break room and start handing them out to everybody. And, problem solved. Everybody would write the perfect special provision. But unfortunately, it's not that easy. So here we are. Going to go over the 4 most commonly used special provision templates. But before we even get into that, it is important that everybody have a basic understanding of specifications and how essential they are to our projects. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So I'll give a basic overview of specifications first. So 3 important points I want you all to remember. All contract projects need specifications. The specifications complement and cooperate with the plans. That means the specifications and the plans are equally important. The plans show the where and the what, while the specifications show the how. So the plans and the specs complement and cooperate with each other. The third point is the plans and the specifications are contract documents. So this sets the tone of how you prepare your plans and specs. Because they are contract documents, you do not assume that it is obvious or that it is understood because it is familiar to those in our industry, or that we've done it in the past this way and we haven't heard any problems. You want to approach it with the mindset that you need to show and write everything to be clear and unambiguous. You want to think of the most uneducated person looking at your plans and specs. Better yet, you want to think of a lawyer looking at your plans and specs. They can potentially cost us billions of dollars or the loss of our professional licenses. So a contract is serious business. The documents are legally binding and enforceable. It is essential that we are diligent and are accountable for all that we put on our plans and specs. So let's go over what are specifications. Specifications are instructions to the contractor on the work to be performed, the conditions and restrictions concerning the performance and execution of the work, the quality of the work required, and how the work will be assessed for payment. Why are specifications needed? It is information which cannot be described with a construction drawing. It is used to control the quality of the materials and construction, and it clearly defines how the contractor will be paid. So there are at least 3 situations when you will need a contract project. When you will need a specification. When you have a contract project, when you want to control the quality of the material, and when you want to control the method of construction. So, specifications are a lot like the recipes in a cookbook, minus the payment clause. So I'm going to use an example from the culinary world to illustrate what can happen when there are no recipes to follow.
Now, pay attention, and trust me, this is not going to be easy, because your next challenge is to recreate this stunning dish. We're looking for the exact replica, identical plating, and identical taste. The idea is literally to slice, see that nice puff pastry.
Yeah, look at that crumble.
Yeah. And then that
Wow,
look at that cook
beautiful.
pastry, followed by that savoury crepe, and then that amazing wild mushroom Bruxelles prosciutto, and then of course a stunning medium rare filet been brushed with Dijon mustard. So heat, red wine sauce, cream mashed potatoes, and the carrots. Carrots are braised with some thyme, garlic, a little bit of sugar to die for.
It's your turn to try and replicate Gordon's world-famous beef Wellington. Nice. Do it. Your 60 minutes starts now.
I have no idea.
Oh my god, not looking good.
Dad, look at Katrina's, can you see it?
There's holes in that.
I'm nervous. Now Katrina's doing a patch job.
You can't put warm things on cold puff pastry.
No.
I don't know what the hell's going on. The puff pastry had to be thin, but there's like holes on each side and underneath.
Katrina, what have you done? Show me.
My beef Wellington, it's not
Dear, oh dear.
I know. It's
Turn it upside down, what have you done to it?
I screwed it up.
Dear, oh dear.
It's not going to be pretty. I just ate his meal and I'm looking at mine and what I did, and it is a mess. Sorry.
Damn. Oh dear. What is that?
Oh my.
That's bigger than you.
It's like family style.
It looks like a cushion from the MasterChef lounge. Where's the steak in here?
It's in the middle.
I have to feel for the steak like a landmine. It's in the middle.
Yes, sir. I know the potatoes came out good. I know.
Bloody
Anyways,
hell.
yes.
Pastry's raw.
Sorry, Chef. I really am.
Okay. So without a recipe to follow, the results can be disappointing. But in the construction world, a project without specifications could result in this. So this is Mexico City in 2017. Did you know that Mexico is considered a world leader in earthquake safety? That they have a wealth of knowledge in seismic engineering and have the best building codes in the world. But you see this. And the reason for this is that it is very difficult to enforce the specifications. Many of their developers like to cut corners, like using subpar material to save costs. And this is the result. So let's take a look at another example. Raise your hand if anybody knows what this project is. This is the Florida International University pedestrian bridge. And this is what happened earlier this year. Let's take a look.
All new at 6, and we're getting a different, closer look at the FIU pedestrian bridge collapse that killed 6 people back in March. New video from FIU, courtesy of the Miami Herald, shows a time-lapse of the bridge from 3 different angles, composed of photos from different cameras around the university. At one point in the video, you see workers standing on top of the bridge before the collapse. The NTSB is still conducting their investigation into the cause of that collapse.
So 6 people were killed. Other people were injured. Many families' lives were shattered. And lawsuits were filed. I hope you noticed in the video that they had allowed traffic to go under the bridge while construction was going on. If they had had a specification that said, close the road while you are working on the bridge, they would have saved some lives.
All new at 6, and we're getting a different, closer look at the FIU.
So let's take a look at the two basic types of construction specifications. The first one is method specifications, and the second is performance specifications. The Green Book is an example that uses method specifications, and Caltrans standard specifications uses performance specifications. Method specifications are a lot like recipes. You follow the exact materials and steps. Performance specifications are concerned with the final product, and there is a lot of in-place testing. So let's go through details of method specifications. They describe the specific materials and methods the contractor is expected to use during construction. This deters contractor innovation. If the contractor uses the specified materials and the process for construction that is specified, the agency will accept the work. Here's an example. This is a material example. And below the spec, I put a breakdown. Basically, it says riprap shall be quarry stone or cobblestone. And quarry stone is angular, cobblestone is round. So if you're using a stone that is flat and thin or jagged and pointed, it will be rejected. So here's an example of a method description. The pavement shall be compacted with 3 passes of the roller. So, performance specifications. They describe the required result and quality of the final product. Specify required performance of the materials, equipment, and completed construction. It gives the agency the ultimate decision to accept or reject the final product. And here's an example. This basically says that they will perform a hydrostatic test. The leakage is not to exceed 0.6 gallons per inch. If it does, you stop the leak, fix it, and then repeat the test until the 0.6 gallon per inch is met. Another example, the pavement shall have a strength of 300 psi. So be careful. Do not mix method specifications with performance specifications, because it may lead to conflicts between them. So here's an example. The pavement shall be compacted by making 3 passes with the roller and shall have a strength of 300 psi. So if you make 3 passes with the roller, will it have a strength of 300 psi? It may not. So there's a conflict if that occurs. And now we're going to go over the 2 typical basic specification formats. The first one is CSI, which is typically used for vertical construction, like in buildings, dams, electrical and mechanical work. And the second one is AASHTO format, typically used for horizontal construction, like on your roadway projects and your underground conduit construction. So if you are submitting your specifications to construction, you need to know that construction administers specifications follow the AASHTO format. CSI format may be acceptable for specialized sections not covered in the Green Book. So it also includes a standard specification and a special provision. The standard specification is the standard specifications for public works construction, also known as the Green Book. So a standard specification is basically a published book that contains the basic requirement for general contract provisions, contains the basic technical specifications for common types of construction, and is commonly used by many public agencies. So an example, using our cookbook example, let's say our chef wants to find a basic recipe for like a chicken broth. So he would find his standard specification would be a basic cookbook that has a recipe for chicken broth that could be used for a variety of dishes. So what are special provisions? Special provisions are specifications that are special to a particular project. The additions and revisions to the standard specification by the needs of the particular project. So let's say you want, for your cookbook example, let's say you want to make coconut chicken soup. So you would start off with your basic recipe for chicken broth, and then you would add like coconut milk, your mushrooms, your lemongrass, ginger, and cook for like 3 hours. So the special provision templates that we use for our specs in our project submittals are referred to as the standard special provisions. They provide consistency and expedite the preparation of commonly used special provisions. These templates are part of a library that is maintained by Construction Division. And if you want to add new special provisions, which will be commonly used in future projects, you need to contact Construction Division and discuss it with them. Revisions to their existing special provisions can also be made based on construction contracted experience. So this is the location of your 2018 special provision templates. Okay, in order to write special provisions that conform to the Green Book, an understanding of the organization and structure of the Green Book is needed. The Green Book is organized by parts. Under each part, there are sections, and under each section, there are subsections, which could be further broken down, and the maximum you could break it down to is where your number has 3 decimal points. Here's an example from the Green Book. I hope you guys can go ahead and go to your Green Book and take a look at the example. And I hope you can follow the logic of how the spec is written, because it is a big clue on how to write specs. For more clues on how to write specs, you can go to the style guide. And the style guide is located at this website. So the first section we're going to cover is section G. And because section G is required for all contract projects, section G supplements and amends part 1 and section 400 and 402 of the 2018 Green Book. Part 1 covers all the business aspects of a project, which are the legal and contractual requirements of the contract. Section 400 and 402 are in Part 4 of the Green Book, and that covers existing improvements. Section 400 goes over protection or restoration. Section 402 goes over the existing utilities. And Construction Division is responsible for preparing and stamping the Section G. Okay, so Section G. Since Construction Division is responsible for it, I'm going to take this time to go over the information in Section G in Part 1 that is relevant to the designers or is just good information to know. So section 1 contains defined terms and abbreviations used in the Green Book. The importance of using these terms cannot be stressed enough. Use of these terms throughout our plans and specifications ensures that we are consistent and prevents us from using incorrect terminology. So whenever you use these defined terms, make sure they are capitalized. An important term that is defined in section G is agency. So we are the agency, and we control the specs. The agency can be defined as one of these three. The County of Los Angeles covers all the roadway, sewer, and airport projects. Los Angeles County Flood Control District covers all the drainage-related projects. And the Los Angeles County Waterworks District covers 3 districts, one in Acton, the other in Antelope, and the last is in Malibu. So other defined terms are engineer, contractor, plans, special provisions, shop drawings. So engineer is a very important term. We don't want to use inspector. We don't want to use field engineer. The term is engineer. And this refers to the office engineer. He or she is the main point of contact between the field and our office personnel. So he will get all the submittals, all the RFIs from the field. He will either answer the questions, answer the submittal, or refer it to the appropriate person. So also in section 1 is a list of abbreviations used in the Green Book. Make sure you check what those abbreviations are, because you might be using some of them in your plans and they might have a different meaning in the Green Book. So if that happens, then you want to redefine that definition, that abbreviation in your plan. An example is like AC. In the Green Book, it means alternating current. And then in the plans, we usually want it to mean asphalt concrete. So section 2. There's a clause in section 2 that states, unless otherwise specified, the contractor will furnish all materials, equipment, tools, labor to do all the work. So on your plans, there is no need to state furnish and install if that's what you want the contractor to do. It's already stated in our spec. One exception Eric had mentioned is trees. For some odd reason, the contractor believes we have trees and they just need to install. So we want to put furnish and install trees. Other topics in this section include change orders, extra work. So section 3 is a really important section. In this section, there's a phrase which they call specialty item. This is work that requires highly specialized knowledge, abilities, or equipment. A subcontractor performs this work and a bid item is needed. An example is like a dry well. You don't want a typical person to be installing a 6-foot wide, 50 to 100 foot deep dry well. You need somebody who's highly specialized in it. And the next part, how does the contractor know that we need to refer to specifications? It says so in our specifications under contract documents. So the plans and the specifications complement and cooperate with each other. The plans show the location, the orientation, character, dimensions, and details. Plan notes clarify the drawings. These notes are part of the plans. Specifications and special provisions instruct on how it's done. So another section is precedence of contract documents. Whenever you have a conflict between the contract documents, you go to this section and it will tell you which is the governing document. Typically, it's the special provision governs over the plans. Plans govern over standard specs. Submittals are very important. The designer provides input on what submittals are required and which need a stamp and signature. The designer should consider who will review the submittal and of what value it is. The submittal must be accepted by the engineer before any material delivery or fabrication or any work can be done. So there's no need to state that in your special provision or in your plans. Working drawings and shop drawings. So these are defined terms in the Green Book, so we must use and adhere to the definition. Working drawings are the detailed drawings not on the plans used by the contractor in the field. An example are shoring plans. It's not in our plans, but the contractor needs plans to build from, so he creates working drawings for shoring. Shop drawings are the detailed drawings of the products. These drawings are used by the manufacturer in the shop. An example are the signs. So shop drawings are submitted to the designer. The designer has to approve the way it looks, and it goes back to the manufacturer, and then they produce it. Supporting information is backup information that is required by the specifications. An example is manufacturer's brochures. So another subsection in section 3 is water pollution, and one of these are used in our plans, not both. So best management practices are used when a project disturbs less than 1 acre. Stormwater pollution prevention plan is used when the project disturbs more than 1 acre. And disturbs mean that you are exposing the subgrade or base for more than 1 acre. Section 4. There are clauses in here that state that all items furnished by the contractor are new and free of defect. There's no need to put new on our plans. The contractor may offer an equivalent to the products listed in the special provisions and submit it for review. So if you have products listed, even if there's 3 and you don't say or equal, this section says the contractor can still submit an equal for review. The only time when he cannot submit an equal is when they have a sole source product. And sole source products or materials need to be disclosed in the specs, and the reason must be justified. Section 5 covers topics like labor for hiring goals, insurance like general liability insurance, and safety like worksite safety. Section 6 includes information on construction schedule. So the designer should, in the design phase, discuss with construction the construction schedule. Also include the construction field staff and T&L, and discuss how to build the project. What are the constraints? And what is the required sequence of work? Time of completion. The designer should also consult with construction field staff about the estimated time of completion. Another topic is time delays. Section 7 covers mobilization payments, change orders, and payment for extra work. Section 8 covers requirements for the field office facilities used by the agency. It applies only when there is a bid item for office facilities. Section 400, protection and restoration. It states in this section that the contractor is required to protect in place all property adjacent to the work. And if an existing improvement within right-of-way was not designated for removal and was damaged or removed due to the contractor's operations, then the contractor is required to repair or replace. The contractor is required to protect all trees that are not to be removed. So these should not be in your plans or your specs, because it's already in our standard specs. Section 402 in the 2018 Green Book covers information on existing utilities and the contractor responsibilities on exploratory excavation. So the next section we'll discuss is Section D, which Margie will cover.
Okay, Section D is going to be used for all drainage and water quality projects. That's going to be storm drains or your low flow diversions. I'm going to just go through the template, and I'm just going to kind of highlight what's in there and show you what you need to edit as you go through this. Okay, first of all, we start with the drainage control. The first part, the general part, you put this in your specs if you're doing work in an open channel. And if you are working in a channel, you want to prepare a water diversion plan for 5% of the channel capacity. You can see there on our table there, the June through August time is 5%, so that's when we will assume construction is happening when you're dealing with an open channel. The second part, the drainage from elements and control of water, we use this for all of the drainage projects, the channels and the storm drains. And you have a nice blue box there. In there you put the capacity, that's the design capacity of the existing system that you're either going to be tying to or that you're messing with. If you're working in an open channel, you put it in exactly the way it's written here in the template. You're going to put in your capacity, you provide a diversion plan at the end of Section D, and you have that bid item at the end. If you're working in a storm drain, the contractor still has to control the water, but it's usually such a small amount, it's just considered tiny, negligible. So if you're working in a drain, you do not have to provide a diversion plan, and you do not need a separate bid item. You're going to have payment, it's just going to be considered as included in the various items of work. This is a sample of a water diversion plan for an open channel. As you can see, it's just 8.5 by 11. It's not to scale. And this is for an invert access ramp. And the whole purpose of this is to show on the plan how to divert the water away from your work area. And then your section there is just to show a cross section of how much area you need to hold that 5% cube. This is included at the end of Section D. The next section is the concrete section. We include this part in our specs if you have any cast-in-place concrete structures that you're building. And you see that box, that structural design criteria. If you have that on your plans, that is concrete specified by compressive strength. So if you have this criteria, you need to include all of those sections under the 201. You need to include high early strength concrete for structures like the box, transition structures, manholes, or some of the larger junction structures. And then the reinforcement for concrete is included for all of the cast-in-place structures. The one thing about this section is if you are doing work with the structural section and there is enough to where the structural people are actually preparing a section S, then you do not want to put this information in your section D. If that is the case, just refer to section S. Make sure you don't repeat this information. Section 207 is for reinforced concrete pipe, so if your project involves reinforced concrete pipe, include the entire section except for these two. That general section, and you can see it highlighted in yellow, when they talk about high velocity, that's velocity over 20 feet per second. A debris carrying system, that's if you're putting a drain, say, immediately downstream of a debris basin, or if you're in a sediment placement site. And special exposure would be like if you're by the ocean, or if you are dealing with some kind of contaminated material. The hydrostatic pressure test, you only have to include this if you are using a watertight system. Most of our storm drains are not going to be watertight systems. You only need watertight if you're dealing with high groundwater or if you have soil contamination. The bedding and backfill, you have to include this for all pipes. Under the bedding material, there's 3 paragraphs. One of them says that the excavated material can be used for bedding, one says it cannot be used, and one says it can be used in certain locations. This is taken straight out of the GMED report, so you pick one of those paragraphs, whichever one is applicable to your project. Same for backfill. And GMED will tell you if there's anything regarding high moisture content. If it says nothing in the GMED reports, keep that part out, just delete it. The filter and drain materials, you include that if you have a sub-drain system. If you don't, just leave it out. Imported fill, that is if you have an excavation, some minor grading going on, and you have some excavation, you have some fill, and it's not balanced, and so you need to import some fill. That would be imported borrow. And also, if your GMED report says that the excavated material cannot be used as backfill, then you have to import backfill. So if you have either of those cases, you're going to include this section, and you also have to make sure it's paid for somewhere. Construction is asking that we include this on all the projects, even if we don't have these 2 kinds of problems, because they said what's happening is the contractors are inadvertently removing too much material, and at the end of the job they find out that they don't have enough to backfill, and so they have to import. And this section covers all the testing and stuff required, so we make sure that we don't get any contaminated material. So include this on all of your projects. This clearing and grubbing section, you want to include it on every single project. And this attachment, which is at the end of the template, this is the recycling summary that goes with the clearing and grubbing. So these 2 things go together. The one thing we want to stress is if you have a project that has multiple sections, like a section D, a section R, a section LS, make sure you use this only once. Doesn't matter which one, just pick one of them, and the other sections just refer to this one. The next one is for asphalt concrete pavement. For drainage projects, this is probably just going to be like a channel access road or maybe an access road in a spreading ground. That part that you see there, that is the entire section. So if you would include this on your plans, what the base course is and the surface course is, you can just eliminate this from your specs altogether. So I think we should try to get in the practice of calling this out on our plans. This section 303, this is also for cast-in-place concrete structures. This is another one, like I said before, avoid redundancy with section S if there is a section S. If there's a structure section, then just say refer to section S. Okay, so if you have any cast-in-place structures, include the entire section except for the removal of forms for cast-in-case reinforced concrete box. That's obviously only for a reinforced concrete box. If you don't have any box, leave that out of there. You have a whole section, general section, that has pay items in there. You need to read through that, and you need to read through each paragraph and edit it for what's relevant to your project. It talks about payment for modifying standard plans and for local depressions. If your project does not involve any of this, you scratch out those paragraphs that are not applicable to your job. If you have special structures, like say an invert access ramp or an outlet structure, you have to include a payment clause for it. And the payment clauses start right there at that 300-112.2. And you say payment for whatever. And then you say what it covers. And then 302 is for air-placed concrete. That is for gunite or shotcrete. Make sure that if you have that you use the proper terminology. Call it air-placed concrete. Do not call it gunite or shotcrete. This metal fabrication section, it relates to flap gates, and there's a picture if you don't know what a flap gate is. This is a flap gate on the left, and on the right is a protection barrier for storm drains. If your project involves this, include it. If it doesn't, just leave it out. Section 306 is the biggest and most complicated section, so I'll go through each of those subsections as we go along. So the first one is removal of surface improvements. This talks about sewer or water line construction, but if you have a project where you're reconstructing sewer house connections, you need to include this in there. If you don't, leave it out. The removal and abandonment of existing conduits and structures, what that talks about is if you're removing existing drains and you want to salvage the manholes and the manhole frames and covers. So again, if you have that on your job, put it in there. If don't, take it out. The maximum length of open trench, this relates to construction in the roadway only. If you're running a trench through a park, leave this out. It's only in the roadway. And then remodeling existing sewer facilities only if that's applicable to your project. If you're not remodeling sewers, then just leave it out. The next one is shoring and bracing. This is for any project that involves shoring. And basically, if your excavation is 5 feet or more, you're going to need shoring. This section should be checked over by GMED. A lot of times you get the GMED report and all it will say is KW equals or the soil was classified as something, just 2 sentences. If that happens, you need to send it back to GMED because there's a lot of things in this section that don't apply to every single project. And they're the ones that need to go through this entire section and edit it properly so that you could just include it verbatim. The dewatering section, that's just standard. We put it in for all open trench work. The bedding, this section is written for reinforced concrete pipe. If you're using a different type of pipe material, then you're going to want to read through this. You may have to edit it, and you're probably going to have to put some more details on your plans. The gravity pipe section, this is again written for reinforced concrete pipe. If you have reinforced concrete pipe, include that section 7.3 for the whole section. You only need the pipeline testing if you have a watertight system. Like I said earlier, that's only if you're dealing with high groundwater or contamination. And the temporary bulkheads, that's standard. We put it in for all reinforced concrete in a trench. Okay, backfill. The general one and the mechanically compacted backfill, we put that in for all of the open trench work. The jetted trench, that has to be checked by GMED. GMED will tell you if jetting is allowed, where it's allowed, or if it's not allowed at all. So you have to check the GMED report for weather jetting is in your specs. The backfill for corrugated steel pipe, that is, if you have corrugated steel pipe, put it in. And then concrete backfill, which is what that picture is, you include that if you have that in your project. You want to remember, if you have concrete backfill, that is a separate bid item, so you have to include that in your engineer's estimate separately. Trench resurfacing only is for open trench in a roadway. If you're trenching through a park, you don't have trench resurfacing. And the measurement portion talks about catch basin connector pipes. If you don't have catch basin connector pipes, just leave this part out. The 306.15, that is the payment clause. And what this is the payment for the conduit in place. And it's a big, long list of stuff that's covered in the payment. You need to look through each one of these items, make sure that it's applicable to yours, or if there's anything else that you need to add to it. One thing you want to remember, the shoring and bracing, shoring is always a separate bid item. Don't ever include it in the price of your conduit. And then there are other subsections under here that you include if they're applicable, such as the pipe inlets, resurfacing, and sewer house connections. Section 307 covers jacking and tunneling. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's when you install a pipe without opening a trench. You just basically open two pits and you push it. You use this when we're very, very deep, or if you're going over something you can't open, like you're going under a railroad. The tunnel classification is provided by GMed, and if you have this on your job, include this. If you don't, you can leave it out. A sub-drainage system, what that is, it's just a small perforated pipe, and that's used to control the groundwater to protect your structures. If your project has this, then you include this entire section. If it doesn't, just leave it out. And then the restoration, we have a bunch of stuff written in the template for protecting and restoring stuff like mailboxes and fences and lawns, and you have to read through every one of those paragraphs and include only what's applicable to your project. If your project does not involve it, then you just delete it. One thing you want to be careful is if you're working with the landscape architects and you're removing a whole bunch of stuff, but they're coming back in with a whole new landscaping plan, then you're not restoring. So you don't want to have any kind of conflicting information. So work closely with your landscape architects on this section to identify what really needs to be restored or what's going to be brand new. And that's the end of my section D.
Okay, section R. So section R supplements and amends parts 2 and 3 of the Green Book. Section R covers the special provisions for materials and methods for work between the roadway subgrade and the pavement finished surface. Design Division will eventually be responsible for preparing and stamping Section R. So Section R is the template is over 150 pages. So I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. So how to use the Section R template? First step, if it's not proposed on your plans, delete it from the template. So for example, a simple cold milling and resurface project, all you need is cold milling. You don't need micro milling, modified payments, PCC pavement grinding. You don't need recycled asphalt. Nope, done. And step 2, follow the highlighted instructions. For like our roadway plans, typically we have asphalt concrete. So the highlighted text says, include the following if asphalt concrete for any application is shown in the plans. So we use that. And typically in our roadway plans, we do indicate the class and grade of the asphalt. So this says, include the following if the class and grade is not shown on the plans. We do show it, so we take it out.
Can I just ask you a question? Like when you say delete, just completely delete it, like don't put like not used or something like that.
Yeah, you want to take it out of the template.
And the table of contents too. Just
Yes.
get rid of it, right?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure.
So there are sections in our template which needs a little bit more insight, so I'm going to go over those sections. Here under ARHM, it says use the following if ARHM is to be produced using a WMA technology. So WMA technology is an additive that you add to the asphalt to warm it up and make it a more workable material. So this section is used only for North County projects at this time, such as projects in Antelope Valley. And the reason is ARHM needs to be placed before it reaches 290 degrees Fahrenheit. So for such a long haul to Antelope Valley, you need to add this additive to warm it up. There are other instructions. Let's see, okay. So section 218, this one, Construction Division actually wants you to include on all projects. This is because they want to cover the option. This is because of in case the contractor decides to import materials. This section covers like the testing requirements for that imported materials. Sometimes materials are contaminated and they want to make sure that the imported material is free from contaminants. So over here, here are some terms that you might want to be familiar with. Borrow is for shoulder work. Backfill is for trenches, and structure backfill is for structures. For every contract, we're going to include this section on construction and demolition debris recycling. But you want to make sure that only one special provision section includes it. You don't want to repeat it in another special provision section. Sometimes you're going to be asked to include a section for QA, QC. So how do you know if you're going to include it? Typically, QA, QC is included when there's a large quantity of the material. For example, ARHM is required when the quantity is over 4,000 tons. You can also consult with Construction Division if they want to include it. Sometimes you might have to choose between whether the agency or the contractor will do the work. Typically, the agency will be performing the work, but you want to confirm with GMed or construction. Just-in-time training is used for a couple of our work and is generally required for large quantity items. So on this, you want to consult with construction before including in your special provisions. Next will be section LS, and Dave will present.
Good morning. I'm just going to do a quick overview of what is the most important thing about our specs is that we coordinate together. And that when it comes to the PS&E, the plan specs and estimates, that there are items that we list that then get into that estimate, and they're all listed the same way. So, good news is you're off the hook. We create them. So, this is just for you to understand what goes into it. So, what we do is we go into the Green Book, and that's a standard publication that lists the items, the materials, and that would be like landscaping materials, topsoil, and then it breaks down that information. You see there is a picture from the Green Book. And what we do is we add our special provisions. Those are going to add something that wasn't part of the printing of the Green Book. And one of those things would be like a soil report. That's really helpful for us because then we can determine what's going on with the import soil or what existing soil is. And then what's also interesting is that this soil report is going to be a line item for the engineer's estimate. And that's helpful because at the end, when we tell the contractor, hey, we need to get a bunch of tests, we know exactly how much those tests are going to cost. It's not unknowable. So landscape architect, you have to ask yourself, is landscape architecture involved with the project? If no, you must edit the template that's given to you already because there may be sections in there that say replace in kind the turf that's in your parkway. If you're doing a section that doesn't include that, you wouldn't need that. And then if yes, you must delete all of the section that has landscaping because we don't want to have an overlap and give an opportunity for the contractor to say, hey, you've conflicted. So the Green Book will list the following. So back to the Green Book, we've got Class A topsoil, there's Class B, and Class C. It's different kinds of requirements for those soils. The one thing that's missing is bioswale soil. Bioswale soil is what we're doing a lot of. So we have that in our special provisions. And it lists all the different requirements that are given, and then they'll give us lab results, and then we measure that. We'll evaluate whether that's part of meeting the requirements that we've stipulated. So I've told you about how we add different parts to the specs. I'm just going to give you an overview of the whole special provisions that we have. So the Green Book has assigned different numbers. What you're looking at here is just in general, 800 refers to materials for our landscaping specs. And the 801 section is how those are installed. And I just realized something I wanted to share with you. Construction called this section LI because it's landscape and irrigation. That was what was in the Green Book. I figured let's call it section LS because we give you a plan LS. So plan LS will give you section LS, so there's no LI and there's no more confusion, it's just everything's on that page. So 800-01 is going to talk about how to install the planting. 801-5 is how to install the irrigation equipment. And back up at 800-2 was where they talked about how those materials were supposed to be, what kind of requirements there were. This template that we work with for the special provisions also includes other portions, which are the 800-16 maintenance and plant establishment. That's what we want to do to get it up and running and make sure it's all working right. Measurement, but the most important here is payment. And payment is going back to the engineer's estimate. It's going to list under this section what items we're talking about and what units being used to pay them. So here's an example. This was items that were added to the Green Book in our special provisions. Our special provisions then list in here some item. And if we find in here, Class A topsoil is paid by cubic yards. So our engineer's estimate would have said pay for cubic soil in cubic yards. No, would have been whatever it says here. Oh, it says cubic yards. If it had said square foot, then you'd have a problem. So you just have to link those things together. And then at the bottom here, I think I have agronomic soil report, and that was for the payment of each. So like I said before, that's something that gives us help during the construction. So the main takeaway here is match the unit. Right here, this is a photo of an improvement. You can think of this as a park-like kind of scenario. You can think of it as along a channel. And we're creating some kind of opportunity for people to collect. In my mind, or a designer's mind, they have river rock that's placed in here, and then maybe some kind of decomposed granite and a heading. Those will each need their own spec. And what they'll do is they'll break it down under general information, the submittal requirements, the materials, the placement, measurement, and again, the reason we're here about payment. So it all lines up. So this is an example of that river rock cobble. It's saying what it's called. I don't think it's supposed to be capitalized, is it? That's not supposed to be capitalized. So that's not a defined term. But the rest of this is correct in that it'll say what the submittals requirements are. It's going to give them 3 alternatives for my materials. Now, you may have that in the way you create your specs, having to have 3 alternatives that they can pick from, not or equal. You're saying it's this, this, and this. And then how it's to be installed. And at the last part down here, it says, contractor will be paid for the contract unit price of square foot for rock cobble. And that was my brief overview. Back to Chris.
Okay. Some final points about your special provisions. I was once told, protect your brand. All of us have a brand. Do you want to be known as a Mercedes or a Lamborghini? Or do you want to be known as a Yugo? So, and nothing screams it louder than what you have in your work, what you produce in your work. So on our special provisions, you want to make sure, especially when you submit it for advertisement, that you go through and you button everything up, just so to speak. Make sure it's ready for presentation. So here's an example of things to look at. And this was actually submitted for our advertisement. So in the table of contents, as you can see, all these are not underlined, then why is this underlined? And then here, oops, you have a title of a section. You should move it to the next page to keep it together with its table of contents. And here you have more underlining. Here you have 2 little sentences that belong to a huge paragraph. So what you want to do is move those 2 sentences to the next page. Here at the bottom he says at the following. What you want to do there, just move it to the next page. On this page, you have 1 little word at the top. So on the page before it, you want to play with the spacing and get that 1 word back to the previous page. At the bottom here, you have a list that is truncated. The rest of it's on the next page. So again, play with the spacing on the previous page and get those 2 items back in, or take this whole section on products, move it to the next page. Here we see some tracking marks. So you need to be careful of those. More tracking marks. Here add the following subsections and you just have the title for that subsection. Move it to the next page. So some of you that have not done special provisions before might be worried about, how am I going to be a proficient spec writer? So here's the key to learning it and being proficient. So everybody knows who John Wooden is, UCLA's winningest coach in basketball. He came up with 8 laws of learning. Step number 1, explanation is what we've done for you today. Explain. Number 2, demonstration. We've demonstrated through some examples. You also have examples in the Green Book and in the Special Provisions templates. Now we're all going to imitate that. And finally, repetition, 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 repetition. And you will all become proficient at special provisions writing.
So I hope you all learned quite a bit. I want to go back to something I said previously about the expectations. The associate civil engineers are writing the specs, and the civil engineers are going to be reviewing the specs. That part remains true. What I didn't mean to do was leave out some of our other classifications and our other writers. You know, we have design divisions comprised of architecture, landscape architecture, mechanical, and electrical engineers. So I know those sections are smaller units and they don't meet the same titles. So I'll let them figure it out and how they want to proceed with their writing and the review process. Again, I hope you all for the first time hearing this sort of stuff, I hope you learned quite a bit and hope it was a refresher for those of you who knew some of this. I want to turn it over to all of you. Sherrie and I in QA/QC, we want to help in any way possible for people that maybe are less experienced in writing these or just need better templates or guidelines. So I want to ask all of you, and you don't have to have the answers now. You can just come over to our desk later on, and think about it later. But do you have any suggestions on what would help make this a speedier process and be more uniform? It's very difficult to have one person write it and somebody else match the exact same thing without knowing what somebody else wrote. So I just want to hear from you all on maybe some suggestions on what would help.
Yeah, when we write specs, I've written a lot of specs, and I always send it directly to construction after reviewing my supervisor. Do we send our specs to Q&A, QC?
Yes.
You guys, before we send it to construction?
That's the goal, yes.
Okay.
So the existing templates, there's a lot of items that are still like one item or agency approved, and when it goes to construction for ACF, we get the call that, oh, you need at least to have at least 3. So maybe for some of the basic items, we can research to have at least a few vendors, and then we put our agency approved. So then we can, at the end of it, we don't have to scramble and look for different vendors for the sole source.
Okay.
So, Chris, was construction, wasn't they considering one time of having a qualified list of materials? Weren't they, I thought one time they were thinking about preparing?
No. No. No, they don't have
It was
any.
recommended or suggested to them anyway.
Caltrans might have some, but construction doesn't have any recommended list of
Because I think
materials
the
or
whole
products.
purpose was that if they're coming in for one project, we didn't have to go through the same process over and over and over again. We had that list.
We can help out with something. Nicole?
Just the minor things, when I did the first time, I realized that table contents. So in Word document, there's a way to set it up in the way, and then when you do the subsection, section L, you just click what level of title you want to be, and then you go to table contents, so you automatically update it there, so you don't have to.
The heading.
Yeah. So it's a
Yeah.
simple table, it can be done like that on the template. Once it's done, you don't have to do it again.
Okay.
And that will save a lot of time.
Great. Paul?
I know like within the footnotes of the templates, it kind of states when you should remove certain sections or whatnot, but I think sometimes it needs to be clarified a little bit, because I know when I was like going through like the drainage stuff that like I was really unfamiliar with, it's still kind of ambiguous to me whether it's like, oh well, should I include it here or not, So I think right now it just says like, oh, if applicable. Like I don't know if there could be a clarification as to like, I think kind of like how Margie was going through her presentation, and she was saying, okay, well, if there's a high water table, you want to make sure it's watertight kind of thing.
Okay.
Something like that, I think clarifies itself a lot more.
Well, you'll have to think of some ideas on that. That's a good point, though. Brian?
Some things that you've mentioned before was having consistency of a term that's used on the plans and the same term used in the specifications. That's something that I hear from Keegan a lot on, is something maybe called a bike path, and then another in the spec, it might be called a bike route. That causes a lot of problems. So just make sure that when you're going through things, pay attention to consistency between the spec and the plans.
I haven't looked through like our division folder or anything, but do we have like examples of like our most common projects and like good specs for each one of those? Maybe, I know that it could be like an issue of like, you might overlook something, but I feel like it'd be a good start.
And we don't have that quite at this time. You know, what Sherrie and I are hoping to be able to accomplish, especially at these first and second submittals, is, you know, we met with almost all of you at one point or another, and we've been asking at the end of these meetings on if there's anything you need help with. So maybe, you know, we can start coming in with some example specifications, or we can direct you to some after the fact, or we can even have a library of them somewhere of, you know, a road project with X, Y, and Z, here's a good one, a drainage project with X, Y, and Z, here's another good one. We can do something like that too. So I just want to make it to where Sherrie and I don't mind putting in the effort. If we put in 100 hours and it takes all of you now 5 minutes to do something, it's better than taking all of you 3 hours to do something. It takes Sherrie and I 15 minutes to do it, right? I want to save all of you time so we can meet this vision. So we got a few things, ideas that we've come up with, but we want to do anything that'll work for all of you. So just want to hear these ideas.
Have you reached out, or have we heard any feedback from the contractor side? Let's say once we've already put something out to bid, as far as the format of what they're looking at, just, I don't know, any sort of comments that have come in after we've already prepared something?
I'm not. Are you aware of anything like that, Harry? I can reach out to Keegan and find out.
We get a little, and yeah, please do. You can reach out to Keegan. But one example would be we've recently started including a calendar that's customized for each project of their working days, because sometimes it's confusing to see it in a paragraph form, but we just make a calendar showing working days and non-working days. So we do get some feedback, and that's one example. Okay. But Keegan would know more.
Okay. Luke?
I think there's such like a wealth of knowledge here, and there's a lot of like essentially standard special provisions within design, but it's hard for us to kind of have that understanding of everyone's project. So kind of like Caltrans says, with a standard special provision like library, like you're talking about, I think would be really helpful. And then on top of that, that could be vetted by construction, so that it's kind of plug and play. But what would also be helpful on top of that is sometimes they're so very verbose that it's hard to understand quite, so maybe a little commentary from the designer, hey, this is my intention, this is what I'm doing on this project, this is why this special provision is in here, something like that. So almost like a plug and play library, similar to Caltrans like standard special provisions, might be a kind of opportunity to look at.
All right, we'll go through some of their documents as well.
From a logistical standpoint, when we have submittals for specs, did you want us to send it like in Word format with track changes on, and that way you kind of know what we've done, what we've edited, or is PDF better? I'm still kind of unsure how you want to send that.
To me, it doesn't matter. I mean, both of them are searchable. That's kind of what we go through is we search for. Like a lot of our review is we are checking between the plan, specs, and estimates that everything is called the same. So as long as it's searchable, and I can search for riprap, or I can search for intake structure, or whatever it might be, and find them in all three documents, that's fine. I don't.
No preference.
No preference.
Another quick one: when you leave sections in, sometimes they reference sections that you might delete. So just pay attention to that once you are going to be leaving something, that you can return and include something that may have been accidentally deleted.
All right. Does anyone have any questions for some of our presenters? Or
this has to do with the specialization of work. In the private sector, we use CSI format. Under CSI format, there's a section called qualifications. I don't see that qualifications in the Green Book, and if we want to specialize, having this work, make sure that the general contractor will sub out that work to someone who specializes and who can prove and demonstrate that this subcontractor has the knowledge and experience to do this specialized work. Having a qualification section really helps that. So I know that this falls under section G, which is typically prepared by construction division. And another question I have is how would they know that this particular type of construction requires specialization? That's something that I guess the designer knows, and how through the designer, communicate that with, the spec writers? And how would you guys define whether or not this subcontractor or contractor actually qualified to do this type of work? Now we're getting into a lot of, very, I want to say unconventional, but specialized construction, like, these dry wells and all that stuff, or some, paving procedures, that's specialized. And what makes things even more complicated is that a lot of the industry would basically patent their process, so that basically you need to come to us, or we're going to sue you if you try to imitate our process. So these are complicated questions, but I thought I'd bring it up to see how.
And we were already doing part of that, right, by saying at the beginning that we require a contractor with a Class A license or a C12 or any various form. I don't know. It'd be a good question for construction. How specialized can we get on requiring them to have a local Los Angeles green tree planting license by whatever, can we go very, very special? Because there's tons of agencies that do certifications on things, right? So we can talk with them on that sort of stuff. And then as far as letting them know, I think it's just, it goes back to our designers and being cognizant of what's in your plans and letting everybody else know. So I'd just recommend picking up the phone and calling them.
For our bridge projects, the PPW projects, we're making the contractors submit a questionnaire with a good proposal explaining their experience in that work.
Okay.
So we can do that with the specialty items too, if that's something you want, if it's something that's unique. Just let us know and we can come up with something. We'll work with you and we can include that also.
On some specialized project, you have to ask the contractors or subcontractors a sample of projects that they have done. I have projects at the dams that the subcontractors have did 3 projects, drilling projects that they did. This is especially critical in the dry well projects. Subcontractors should submit similar projects that they have successfully finished, and I think that would be helps a lot, because as far as I know, there are very few drillers that could do dry wells as big as 6 feet. So if there is no similar project that they have done, I mean, we have to go to other states or to get those contractors, and that would be very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, these are awesome questions, and I don't have all the answers. We're typically bound by the lowest bidder. Who's to say that it's equivalent experience drilling a 15-foot hole is a 100-foot hole? I'd say they're very different. But does that dismiss the lowest bidder? I don't know.
That's why they have
to
get a subcontractor who can show that they can do it.
So maybe it's like pre-qualification.
Pre-qualification, yes.
So, I think these are some great questions. We'll go talk with our colleagues here in construction. We'll come back with some answers. But again, it gets back to everyone in this room here on just being aware of what you're putting in your plans and letting others know that should know, instead of having them find it themselves. You know more than anybody else on your project, so spread that information.
For something like that, let us know as soon as possible. We'll want to find that out when you guys give us the ACF. So when you're designing and you already know you may need a specialized subcontractor, let us know so we can figure out a way to attack that, because we're limited on what we can do with the public contract code. If we can do pre-qualifications, it'll take some time. If we can do a questionnaire, it'll take some time. So for something like that, just let us know as soon as possible. I can design phases and we'll work with you.
Rafi?
I have a question for Margie. For section D, the backfill requirements, you were saying you had to coordinate with GMed. How on board are they? Have been in recent, months to give them the specs essentially and kind of have them sort of finesse all that out?
Well, they've been good about giving us their soils report.
Yeah.
But the problem that I have seen under the 3064 is that it's just very abbreviated, and that's part that you need to go back and look at and make sure that, either you edit it and have them check it, or just give them the template and tell them, you have to edit this entirely.
Okay, but they're aware that we're working together.
Yeah.
Okay.
It only happens sometimes, but
Okay.
Are there any types of reports, Sherrie, that need to be included in the specs? Like materials
Yes.
test reports, geotechnical reports?
Yes, there are. I can't think of one off the top of my head. But if you specify, look at the report, then you probably want to attach the report to your spec.
Just wanted to add to Margie, if you do a major change to a project because something comes up. So being in GMID, you may have had a trenching project, and then some conflict may have occurred due to maybe some gases or something like that. So you go to open trench, but that didn't get communicated back to GMID, so the inclusion that they would have had for the special provision is no longer appropriate, and you need to change it. And so sometimes they don't see it until late. So yeah, just think, if you think it's going to affect the special provision, just communicate with the team. Consider them part of your team.
For items that are associated with multiple sections, for the special provisions, say for example it's clearing and grubbing, and maybe clearing and grubbing is involved with section LS, but also maybe with one of the other sections. Typically in the template, is it the same language? So if you remove one, it's removing identical language that may be in another section. And in which section do you include it in? Is it, which would be the primary section that you would include that language in if you're going to delete it from another section and reference it to some.
This is where the coordination really needs to come into play, and I hate saying it, but it is a case-by-case basis. I would highly recommend for this clearing and grubbing example, you include that language under whichever pay item it's going to be. So you don't want clearing and grubbing as a pay item under a drainage spec, but then the language itself is under landscape architecture's specifications. And now that's not clear. So if they're going to get paid for clearing and grubbing under one other item, or it's its own pay item, it doesn't need to be written other places. You just need it in one place.
But the clearing and grubbing item is just one pay item that covers for all Plan LS, Plan RD, some various ones, right?
So one way you can do it is so if you're showing or indicating that clearing is grubbing and is going to be taking place in your Plan D, you want to put it in your Section D. You want to have that one-to-one correspondence. That's how you do it, but basically the language would be the same. If you're showing other work in your Plan LS, like planting, you would put that in your LS.
This is what we've been noticing over the last 10 months or so since I've been reading as many of these that comes through as possible, is the specs seem to be better on smaller projects with less disciplines involved. It's when we have these 4 and 5 discipline plan sets is it becomes a mess. And so I really suggest you get together as a team early in the process and you sit down all together and figure out what you want to call everything and differentiate whose work is on what other plan set. And you do that a couple of times during the process. I know you learn things between your first submittal and second submittal and your second and third. Everyone needs to be, all on the same page versus trying to scramble at the end and, well, I did my specs and Sherrie did her specs, and you don't just insert them together. It's not the way. That's how we have these mistakes. So you really all need to sit down together as a team frequently and start talking about these items. So if there's not anything else.
Yeah, one more. With respect to that coordination with construction division for certain items, is there any guidance that maybe rather than each of us going up and communicating with construction staff to get guidance on a particular item, that maybe they can put something together that makes it easier for us just to look at something, or some sort of reference document that allows us to better understand what should be done for certain items.
They're already maintaining the majority of the boilerplate stuff. So, we can sit down, individually, you and I and Sherrie, and talk maybe some suggestions on certain things. We got plenty of them around here. What I'm kind of just thinking about is potentially putting together, if you really think about all of our plan disciplines in design, we've got about 30 or less main types of work between conduit, bridge, guardrail. If you think about the main types of work, we probably got 30 or less. From there, maybe have some sort of matrix on plan or section R, section D, section LS, section EI, all across the board, and say if you've got this type of work, you might have conflicts with the other sections. Something like that. So almost like a cheat sheet to kind of guide everyone in the right direction. But if there's, we want more of these sort of like a living document with comments by the writer on this was their intention or this was some special things for these whatever scenarios where we can do all sorts of things. It needs to be a tool that we don't want to create tools just to create tools. We want to create things that are useful to everyone. So it's a broad task, but we're up for the challenge. And I just really want to make everyone here more efficient with their time and it to be just more uniform across the board from everyone. I know it's very difficult with 80 or so people writing these things.
Good job, guys.
Thank you all very much.
Will the